My name is Stefen Fangmeier. I'm a visual effects supervisor and had a very storied career working initially starting on Terminator 2 and numerous other projects at Industrial Light and Magic, including Jurassic Park, the first one, Twister, Perfect Storm, Master and Commander, and a number of others. When I was starting to go to university, I hadn't quite decided what I wanted to do, but I took a philosophy class, and within philosophy is a branch called logic. And I realized that it's very easy for me, logically thinking, which doesn't come to all people that easily. And also a friend of my father's had been working for IBM for a long time. And what he told me was that, well, if you get into computers, you're going to have to learn something new every 2-3 years because it's a very much evolving technology. And that sort of interested me. So I basically studied computer science. And within computer science, I took a few classes on computer graphics. And I sort of realized that it was probably the most creative thing for me to do with a computer was to create imagery. And although I was very good at programming, which I also very much loved doing, I decided to concentrate on computer graphics after I graduated. And even while I was going to university, I was working at the Aerospace Corporation, which is a nonprofit company that collaborates with NASA. And so I went to school from 78 to 81. So this is really early days in computer graphics, but they were visualizing some of the things and we're using computers for that. And so after I graduated, I got another job in a different department at that company and sort of got my start in very simple graphics. Then in 1985, I joined a company in Los Angeles called Digital Productions. They had worked on the film The Last Starfighter. And there were very few job opportunities in the 80s in computer graphics, because it was still very much a growing and upcoming field and wasn't all that reliable that it would really actually turn out on budget. It was still expensive film work, commercial work. But that was my start at Digital Productions for about 1.5 years before the company actually went bankrupt, which was not unheard of in the 1980s in the computer graphics business. So then after Digital Productions, I then moved to Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. That's about 2 hours south of Chicago to work at the University of Illinois to do scientific visualization. And so that means I'd already done some of that work at Digital Productions because I actually had a Cray supercomputer. So scientists funded by the National Science Foundation would use those funds to run computer simulations on the Cray. And then I would help them visualize the output. For instance, I did a simulation of a star cluster collapsing into a black hole. Now, I don't know why that was important. And other things. I even worked, once I had moved to Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, at the university with some tornado chasers who were trying to simulate how tornadoes are formed, which of course has real-life implications that are very important. So, interestingly enough, then 10 years later, I actually worked on a film, Twister, about tornado chases. So it's kind of an interesting wraparound, so to speak. A visual effects supervisor, in most of my cases of projects, becomes involved with a film production or a TV series production very early on. After the scripts are written, first of all, it's determined, well, can we actually do this using visual effects? That was pretty much often the case in the 1990s because what we were doing was still being developed. For instance, before Twister, nobody had visualized tornadoes, for a film. For Perfect Storm, nobody had done water. So the first thing was to do a test, determine can it be done, and then once it is, you have to analyze the screenplay, break it down. In other words, you say, okay, this is going to be this one moment, and you have to account for every moment that's going to be a visual effects moment. And then you discuss all of that with all the other departments. So you essentially become a member of the filmmaking crew that you just have, you're in the department that's going to do most of the work in post-production. But you also have to be there right in the planning phase because everybody else needs to know how we're going to film this, what are our requirements in terms of the visual effects in order how it needs to be filmed, what is going to be a practical set, for instance, you will build, and what are we going to extend digitally afterwards. So there's a lot of discussion, a lot of planning, very detailed planning. And now a lot of animation is being done ahead of time to basically animate out and block out entire scenes. So everybody knows, okay, we're going to need that many extras. We're going to need the green screen or blue screen here and there. So that's all driven by a fairly small group in visual effects at that point, but a team that's essentially, and that team usually then moves on to the filming. So a visual effects supervisor is present on set when visual effects are being filmed. And even when they're not, because you never know when suddenly something comes up where the director turns to you and say, can you fix that? Or can you add this here because it didn't work out the way we had planned? So you're always there to make sure everything is done correctly, but also to provide solutions when problems arise.
Come with me if you want to live.
Oh, as a visual effects supervisor, you very much have to stay on top of the technology. And, you know, they don't spring on you. Oftentimes you're driving, in other words, the technology as well yourself when you're saying, okay, well, what we need to do for this particular project, let's figure out how to do it, and you work with the team. So it's, yeah, it's important to be technically, yeah, because it's always changing. The software is always changing. The capabilities are changing. And also what filmmakers and TV show, you know, showrunners would like to do. There's always, you know, new ideas and new challenges that come up. So it's definitely an ever-evolving career, that's for sure. Well, back in the day, like I said, in the 90s, their visual effects sequences and even other sequences of films were certainly storyboarded. Now it's become more that animation called pre-visualization, previs for short, are being done. So they're actually animated with, you know, in three-dimensional characters and all of that environments in the computer with the proper camera lenses. So you basically say, oh, I would like to use a 35mm for this shot and for this angle, and then the director reviews that with the people doing the previs and makes some tweaks so that, you know, even especially also, you know, action sequences that might not require a whole lot of visual effects per se, like a car chase, but you do have to plan out exactly, okay, you know, this shot, I need this much, and, you know, I need to clear this background here. So it's a very useful tool that has sort of had a big impact on filming in general because it allows you to plan in a more realistic way than just looking at pencil drawings. Well, I always say, from my perspective, in terms of how the industry has evolved, that the 90s were definitely sort of the big pioneering days. When you basically, you know, some filmmakers would come to you and say, can you do dinosaurs? You know, Steven Spielberg came to us in Jurassic Park. And we had just finished up Terminator 2, worked really hard to get it done. We're like, I don't, you know, because you don't want to say yes and then you can't deliver. So when you say yeah, especially working for a company like Industrial Light and Magic, which had a great reputation in the industry, you also have to deliver. So we start developing the tools and do the research and able to create dinosaurs. And then when you're kind of close enough, then you say to Spielberg, yes, we can do it. And so that was very exciting. And, you know, same with Twister, Perfect Storm. I mean, many projects, many films in those 90s, you know, those 10 years, really changed the industry drastically. You know, everybody wanted to have digital visual effects, so miniatures and all the other old-fashioned way of doing visual effects or creating things that weren't, you know, you couldn't have in front of the camera, kind of went out the window, and the whole industry turned towards digital. And then it slowly developed into this concept of do more for less money and less time. In other words, you know, the computers got faster and the capabilities got greater, and people just wanted a lot more of it. And filmmakers were essentially creating films, like a lot of the Marvel movies, where almost every shot is a visual effects shot, you know. And that even has also moved over into animation, you know, the sort of the days of pencil and paper and colored, animation is sort of almost done because it's all gotten computer based. So it's changed drastically and rapidly, and so I'm sort of at the end point in my career voluntarily. And I think now with AI, there's another phase coming that is going to impact the industry also drastically. So I'm quite happy to sort of ease my way out of it at this point. In terms of would AI ever replace actors in front of the camera? I don't think so. I mean, now we've gotten better at creating digital humans. That certainly is, or making actors like Harrison Ford 30 years younger. That's sort of been achieved. But there's so much more to an actor's performance that just is beyond technology per se, or even an AI ability to, yeah, you can do digitally doubles, or you can, duplicate somebody, but actually to create an AI creation that's entirely not based on anybody who's come before, I think would be interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's not very likely, and you kind of wonder if it makes sense to do at this point anyway.
You're really real.
His loyalty is to a child.
Who sent you?
You did. 35 years from now.
And his enemy
He's a Terminator like you, right?
Not like me.
is the deadliest machine ever built.
People always ask me for one favorite film, and I say, I can't have one of my projects be the most favorite one. But I mean, it certainly was Terminator 2, which was my first Hollywood film that I really worked on, my first film in industrial light and magic when, I was 30 years old when I joined the company.
This time, there are two. Terminator 2.
That is an exciting film, and I think it was also groundbreaking. And you watch it today, and it still holds up in terms of the action and the visual quality of it. So I think that really stands out as a good one. I also think Jurassic Park, of course, was an incredible milestone.
Genetics has mastered creations.
We've made living biological attractions so astounding that they'll capture the imagination of the entire planet.
And extinction is a thing of the past.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
When people saw that, they were just completely blown away by, even though nobody's, experienced dinosaurs, but we certainly made it sort of that people were like, wow, seeing is believing. Twister was my first project as a visual effects supervisor without working with somebody else.
We have touchdown. Tornado is on the ground. Woo-hoo! It's a wonder of nature, baby!
And in general, the film was also very groundbreaking, and it was a completely different style of filmmaking, so that's one of my favorite. And of course, Perfect Storm.
We're here for you guys.
It's also a very good one. A very difficult project, technically very challenging, but also groundbreaking. And then number 5, I would say, just because it was so different, was Master and Commander.
All right, lads. Touch wood, Mr. Blakeney. Turn 3 times. May the Lord of Saints preserve!
Because it was essentially a beautiful film, but it was also a film where the audience wasn't thinking all the time, this is visual effects, because you can basically take these ships onto sea and do all the film. You could definitely do that. It would be highly impractical and very expensive to do so, but so it was really kind of one of those invisible effects films rather than the most obvious visible, ones, because it was just 2 ships that, existed a couple of 100 years ago on the water. And that's something that was also fun to do because it wasn't quite so obvious.
All hands down!
Well, Perfect Storm, I think, was definitely the toughest challenge in terms of the technical aspect of it and what we had to invent and to create. It certainly was. I mean, yeah. I mean, they're all, even Jurassic Park was, of course, a big challenge. So it's hard to pick one. And, but after those, after the 90s and going into the 2000s, things became more general in that there are a lot of other companies who could do these things. A lot of software became commercially available to solve all these things we invented in the 90s. So it really changed, and now you could say it's almost nearly anything is possible as long as you have enough money and also some time. You know, you do need some time because that's one thing money can't buy. So I do go to the cinema every once in a while. I live in the French countryside now for the last 5 years. Although I travel a lot, but they have actually a beautiful movie cinema that I go to see. The last film I saw actually in Bangkok in Thailand of all places in the cinema was the new Gladiator film. And because I do appreciate the large format, you know, when it's a film that really benefits from having the big screen. And fortunately, foreign countries now also have the original sound, so you not get the people talking Thai or in France French. So because I can't watch films that are dubbed, that's really against sort of my philosophy of enjoying foreign films. Yes. I tend to not necessarily like visual effects driven films or heavy films, like all the Marvel movies. I really just don't. I mean, but there's some films that have visual effects. I mean, like the first Dune, I think it was really great. Gladiator obviously also has a lot of visual effects. And I mean, I can enjoy it, but I don't necessarily catch myself thinking about, oh, how'd they do this or that all the time. I just know oftentimes, well, that was a lot of work, so it kind of puts a different perspective on it. But yeah, I think I also have gotten into watching a lot of streaming and series, you know, which is kind of a different format than the classical film structure. So there's a lot more interesting character development. There's just more freedom in you know, that sort of storytelling rather than just doing it all in 2 hours, but giving you a whole season or maybe multiple seasons. And so I enjoyed also working on Game of Thrones on a few seasons, especially the last one. And there's really some high quality creation going on in that medium as well. And it's really not that different anymore than from this big screen cinema, you know, in terms of streaming. Yes.